referred to as the Dark Continent? If so, you probably think that's a racial reference to Africa, which is true, but that's actually the second meaning. The term was originally used in the 15th and 16th centuries when major empires such as England and Spain were sending out explorers in search of new territories. Exploration began at the sea and moved inland, so maps would have very detailed coastlines. But very often, the regions further away from the coast were not actually explored until much later. So cartographers would shade in these areas to signify the fact that there was a lack of information about them. They were unilluminated, unenlightened, and therefore dark. I have lived, worked, and traveled throughout 17 different African countries. On my first trip, I spent 3 months in Sierra Leone, a country you have probably heard about from news stories and movies about blood diamonds and civil war. My longest stint was in Botswana, arguably one of the safest and most peaceful countries in Africa. Despite being surrounded by former apartheid states, Botswana has never dealt with any real racial discord. They've never had a war, so the army is more comfortable coming to your house to capture and remove the lion that has wandered into your backyard. This is Africa, these things happen. The army is more comfortable with animal removal than they are shooting guns. And chances are, if you own a diamond, it may actually be from Botswana, as they are the second largest producer in the world. Despite Sierra Leone and Botswana having very different histories, economies, and social structures, they share one common problem, which is pervasive throughout the entire continent: infrastructure. When I think of the expression, a dark continent, this is what I think of. This is a map produced by NASA. It is a compilation of photos taken of every time zone at the same time of night. So we're able to see what the Earth looks like from space, and specifically how we are using one of our most valuable resources, electricity. As you can see, the US, Europe, India, China, very bright. Even here in Australia, pretty bright. But Africa is remarkably dark. I was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Botswana, and midway through my fellowship, I applied for an extension so I could stay longer and continue my work. 4 weeks prior to being scheduled to leave, I found out I received the second fellowship. And I remember the exact moment in time that I decided to turn it down. I was standing in a dark grocery store in Gaborone, which is the capital of Botswana. We had been experiencing inconsistent electricity for months. Every few days or weeks, the electricity would suddenly come on, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for a few hours, but just as suddenly it would disappear again with no indication as to when it may return. In addition to these massive blackouts, we were under very severe water rationing because the dam was at less than 10% capacity. I had not taken a real shower or eaten any cooked food in several days. I was standing there in the grocery store looking at a jar of pickled onions. Now, this is not something that's normally on my grocery list, but my stomach was growling. There were very limited supplies on the shelves, and I knew that I needed to purchase something that I could take home and eat that I did not need to cook. Tears were in my eyes when I was looking at this jar of pickled onions, and it was at that moment that I decided to turn down the second Fulbright. Now, I'm an academic, which means my career is highly dependent upon my research output and grant money that I receive. So to turn down a research grant is very unusual. Don't get me wrong, I loved every minute of my time in Botswana. And I always look forward to going back there because it's kind of like going home again. But the challenges of daily life there, long term, were really wearing me down. And I was afraid that if I stayed another 12 or 18 months, that I would really become disenchanted with the experience, and so I decided to leave. Now, as I said, I am an academic, and my specialty is tourism. And in my opinion, at least, as a tourism scholar, I can think of no better place to be than Africa. Africa has some of the richest and most diverse natural resources on the planet. Have you ever read the book or watched the movie Gorillas in the Mist? If not, please go home and do so. You will not regret it. You could walk in Dian Fossey's footsteps. I did. There are fewer than 800 mountain gorillas alive in the world today, and you can only see them by trekking through the mountains of Uganda, Rwanda, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. Maybe you'd like to climb the highest freestanding mountain in the world, in which case, head to Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. Nearly 25,000 people attempt the summit each year, and 2 out of 3 of them are successful, so the odds are in your favor if you're up to the challenge. Of course, you could always emulate my personal hero, Dr. David Livingstone. He is believed to have been the first European to have seen the waterfall which marks the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe. He subsequently named it Victoria Falls in honor of Queen Victoria. Unfortunately, when most people think of Africa, they don't think of these and the many other amazing tourism opportunities. Instead, they worry about the safety and security of the region. They think back to old news stories about illegal animal poaching, child soldiers, and famine. And rather than thinking of Africa as a great place to visit, they think of it as a charity case. And this is actually what motivates many people to go there. They want to go there to gawk and pity. Pro-poor tourism is a tourism approach designed to stimulate tourism while simultaneously reducing poverty. While the economic benefit is the primary objective, improving the lifestyles of communities through non-financial means such as education and healthcare is also at the forefront. However, pro-poor tourism is not a cure-all. Quite the opposite. It often has unintended and negative consequences. One of the most prominent types of pro-poor tourism is volunteer tourism, or voluntourism. Voluntourism is an emerging trend in which tourists travel somewhere to conduct community service. Voluntourism is a multi-billion-dollar industry dominated primarily by young people who are paying, oftentimes thousands of dollars, to participate. And voluntourism is highly unregulated. Agencies place volunteers in positions without training them. The vast majority of money these volunteers pay does not go directly back to the communities in which they are serving. And very often, the jobs which volunteers are doing actually rob community members of potential employment opportunities. One of the most popular types of voluntourism is working in an orphanage. Most Western countries have found alternatives to the traditional orphanage system, which is why that's so appealing. We simply don't have them around us. So, as a result, visiting and working in orphanages has exploded in recent years. A couple of years ago, I had to go to Congo for work. And Congo is one of those destinations that's a little bit difficult to arrange your own travel as an independent traveler, so I decided to use a travel agent. I told him what I needed and wanted to do, and then asked him for other suggestions, because after all, he is the expert. He sent me back a proposed itinerary, which included a visit to an orphanage. Now, throughout the years, I have visited probably dozens of African orphanages, and when I lived in Botswana, I volunteered for one regularly. So I simply did not feel the need to see another one, and I told my travel agent this. I called him up via Skype and let him know this, and his reaction was priceless. He was absolutely dumbfounded. "What do you mean? All tourists go to the orphanage. The orphans are expecting you." Now, I know I'm popular, but I did not know that the orphans in Congo were expecting me to come visit. I'm not joking. This was his response. Now, oh, and by the way, despite removing the orphanage from my itinerary, he took me there anyway. Now, orphanage tourism can only be successful if there are children there to see. And ultimately, without a doubt, there are legitimate orphanages. However, research shows that upwards of 80% of children living in orphanages in Africa have at least one living parent. Orphanage directors entice parents to hand over their children with promises of a better life. Now, these children oftentimes do receive education, but only until they are too old to tug at the heartstrings of visitors. Once they become too mature, they are often kicked to the curb and replaced by younger orphans. 1.2 billion people travel internationally every year, yet only 58 million of them go to Africa. That means that fewer than 5% of international tourist arrivals go to Africa. Worldwide, 1 in 10 jobs is in the tourism industry. But in Africa, that figure is 1 in 20. Now, the tourism industry in Africa is growing and at a rapid pace of about 8% per year. But even still, Africa represents a very small piece of the tourism pie, which is all the more reason for us to support it, particularly given that tourism is such a powerful means of advancing infrastructure development in Africa. Rwanda has roughly 200 mountain gorillas. 200. There are more people involved in this event today than there are mountain gorillas in the entire country of Rwanda. Yet they've taken this very small resource and transformed it into a $200 million a year industry. In 2005, the Rwandan government created a tourism revenue sharing scheme. To date, they have managed to fund more than 300 community-based initiatives as a result. They have also built roads, schools, hospitals, bridges, sanitation facilities, and other critical infrastructure. There are countless ways to illustrate the need for infrastructure in Africa, but I should note, Africa is not sitting back waiting for charity to come solve its problems. There are 2 experiences that will always remain with me that really showcase Africa's willingness to adapt and its desire to make progress despite very limited resources. You know how you walk into a meeting room or a university classroom and you see a sign that says, "Do not remove desks or chairs from this room"? Well, in Africa, there are never enough desks or chairs. So they have this tendency to migrate with the students. They'll actually show up early, claim a desk and chair, and carry it with them from classroom to classroom. Because they know if they don't, chances are good they will be sitting on the floor. But classrooms are also at a shortage. I remember years ago when I was a uni student studying back in the States, every once in a while, if we were lucky, if the weather was good and the tutor was happy, we would have class held outside. And this was awesome. It was a real treat to be outside instead of stuck indoors. I think this only happened actually twice during my bachelor's degree. Well, in Africa, outdoor classrooms are not an option. they are often an imperative. This is one of the classrooms I taught in over there, and this is the nicest one outside that I taught in. As you can see, no PowerPoint projections, not even an old-fashioned blackboard. While university administrators are looking for creative ways to meet the needs of their students, the students are also taking their destinies in their own hands. What would you do if you needed to study and there was no electricity on at home? You take your textbooks, you go outside, and you sit underneath one of the street lights. I watched my students do this a couple of times, and then I thought to myself, if they're doing this, why am I sitting at home alone in the dark? So I took one of my books and went outside with them to read. Well, students talk, as students do, and so word got around that I happened to be out. And the next thing I knew, I had students coming over asking me questions about concepts I had actually covered in class within the last few days. And I always laugh when I think of this because I think of my colleagues, think of your professors. I think of my colleagues, and I can't imagine any of them sitting on a street corner under a street light at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night having consultation sessions with students. But then again, I mean, you can't go home to cook dinner or take a shower or watch TV, so hey, why not? You might as well go out and help your students. If you want to help Africa, go there, visit, be a tourist. And when you go, be a responsible tourist. Look for locally owned tourism operations. By supporting local businesses, you're having a greater economic impact, and every dollar you spend has a ripple effect. You don't realize this, but the money you pay to go on safari helps a community pave a dirt road, which in turn means that vaccines can be delivered faster. You don't think that going on vacation can save lives, but indirectly, yes, it can. And when you come home, please tell your friends about it. Encourage them to go to Africa and see it for themselves. And remind them there is more to see there than animals. This is, after all, the birthplace of human civilization. I love Africa and will always consider it my second home, which is why I want so badly for it to be a success. But outsiders coming in to save it is not the answer. For Africa to thrive, it has to do so on its own terms. I speak 4 languages, and of all the many words that I know, my favorite word is pula, which is a Setswana word. You've probably guessed that Setswana is the national language of Botswana. And pula means blessings. Now, the official currency of Botswana is called the Botswana pula, because after all, money is a blessing. Pula is also the word we use for rain, because in a very dry country like Botswana, rain is most definitely a blessing. And so, I would like to wish you all pula on your future trip to Africa. I have no doubt when you get there, you will see value in being a part of bringing the dark continent to light.